Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my top 20 books for Q3 of 2025. These are all the best books that I read in July, August, and September. I love making these quarterly videos. It's fun to sort of surface of all the books that I'm reading. What are the top ones? What are my favorites of the year, which will be the final books that I talk about in this video, but also what were the best of the books that I was reading, especially because these days I'm not always finishing books that I'm not loving, so I'm reading a lot of really good books. In Q3, I read a total of 61 books, so this video is the top 1/3 of the books that I read during Q3. My average rating for the quarter was a 4.1, and the books that I'm talking about for this video all range from a 4.5 star to a 6 star, which is a favorite of the year. I will tell you specifically which books are favorites of the year. There's 4 of them, so those will be at the end of the video, but there's lots of other really great books that I've read as well, so I hope you enjoy. These are not really in any particular order other than the 4 favorites of the year that I'll talk about at the end, so let's go ahead and dive in. First up is We Don't Talk About Carol by Kristen L. Berry. This is a book I had for review from the publisher, which honestly will probably be the case with the majority of these books because the majority of my reading is books that I have for review, but I will let you know if that's not the case. This is a debut mystery that I thought was really fantastic. It follows a Black woman who is dealing with things from her past, dealing with infertility issues and how that's impacting her marriage, when she finds out that she had an aunt that she never knew about. And she ends up investigating a string of disappearances of Black girls from this one neighborhood back in the 1960s and tries to figure out what happened to them, why nobody really dug very far into it. One of those women was her aunt, but there were a string of them. I really like this. I thought it was a really impressive debut. I think this book has series potential, and I would love to see more. One thing that I think is really great about this book is it's highlighting the fact that in the past and also today, when we look at missing persons cases, often people of color are sort of swept under the rug, don't get the same kind of media attention as if we have a white girl who goes missing. So this is a mystery novel looking at missing Black girls who nobody cared enough to really look for, and the main character who uses her journalism background to go digging. I like it because we get a lot of things happening in her personal life in the present day, but then we're also finding out more about what happened in the past. I thought it was a really satisfying ending. I would recommend. Next up is A Mastery of Monsters by Lizelle Sambury. Full disclosure, I am friends and mutuals with Lizelle, but I also really love her writing. This is the start of a new fantasy series that she's writing. It is YA, kind of dark academia meets paranormal competition and shifters and monsters. I really liked it. It's got a mystery, it's got romantic elements to it. It's set in Canada, and it's also doing some really interesting things thematically in terms of looking at the way that institutions and organizations might sometimes say that they are inclusive or colorblind, but in practice, that is not what bears out in terms of the power structures. I think this was really well done. There's a lot of world building in it, and I'm curious to see where the rest of the series goes. Worth saying that while this is book 1 of a trilogy, it does have its own satisfying arc and conclusion. We are left with some sort of plot threads that make you interested in picking up the next book, but the main plot of book 1 is wrapped up in a satisfying way. Next is The Dead Husband Cookbook by Danielle Valentine. This one is going to be a lot of fun if you like a bonkers thriller. Is it a little bonkers, especially at the end? Yes, but I'm here for it. It was incredibly entertaining. This follows a woman who is an editor who kind of got in trouble for something she'd done recently and is on the verge of getting fired. When she gets the opportunity to sort of cement her career and make it better, a celebrity chef plans to write a memoir and will only work with her as an editor, but with some stipulations. There are going to be no digital copies of the memoir, and she has to go work with her editing in person at the farm, her sort of like ranch where she lives. The editor has always been a fan of her, but there have always been rumors surrounding the death of her husband, that maybe she killed him. And as she goes there, things get weirder and weirder. And she's also a new mom, so she's got a daughter that she's leaving with her husband. It's really interesting. It does get bonkers towards the end. I found it to be really entertaining. I would recommend it if that sounds like your thing. Next up is a horror novel. This is Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle. This is interesting. It is set in Las Vegas and it follows a statistician who is part of an extremely unlikely event and is kind of traumatized by it, and then later on gets sort of swept into a mystery with cosmic horror elements, I would say. It's definitely horror. It's definitely kind of weird, sometimes funny. It's dealing with bisexual erasure, and it's also dealing with the ways that the world and the things that happen can be bizarre and don't always make sense, but that doesn't mean there's not hope for the future. So it's maybe weird to say that it is a hopeful horror novel, but I would say it is hopeful, and I thought it was a lot of fun. Next is Mirage City by Lev A.C. Rosen. I adore this series so much and I want to push it on people so they'll get into it. This is a historical mystery series with a gay private investigator living in San Francisco, I think in like the 1950s. What's great about it is you sort of follow his progression and his character development over the course of the series, while each book has its own mystery plot as well. This is the fourth book in the series. This one feels really timely, especially with political things that are going on. In this book, he's dealing with a missing persons case, and some of the themes that end up getting encountered are things like gay conversion therapy from a more medical treatment standpoint, which I'll be honest is kind of horrific, but I think it handles it well. And then it's also about respectability politics in the queer community and a cohort of people who think that the way to be accepted in society as queer people is to blend in with straight people and to sort of push off to the side anybody who doesn't fit that, anybody who is more flamboyant, anybody who is trans, for example. And again, this is something that we are seeing in the queer community today. So while this is a historical novel, it feels a little bit like, nothing under the sun is really new, and I think it's really timely, but it's also an entertaining mystery with a character that I really love. I think this whole series is excellent, and I really liked Mirage City. Next up is House of the Beast by Michelle Wong. I think this is really fun. It is a blend of dark fantasy and cosmic horror. This follows a girl who is the bastard daughter of the head of a noble house that worships the beast, this deity, where they chop off one of their arms, and if the beast decides to use them, it uses a fake arm to sort of like wield power on their behalf, if that makes sense. So when she's 10 years old, her mom gets really sick and her dad comes and takes her away and takes off her arm, and she ends up being weirdly good at wielding this power. And also she has an imaginary friend who maybe isn't so imaginary, and we get a time jump to where she's an adult and has been ostracized by people in the house, and maybe she wants revenge. It's great. I really liked it a lot. Also, there's illustrations throughout it by the author, which are a lot of fun. I would recommend it if you like that kind of a genre thing. It does have a romantic element, but I would not call this a romance. Next is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I loved this so much. It made me cry. I feel like this is one that could end up on my favorites list at the end of the year. We'll see, but it's definitely high up there. I have a standalone review video for this that I can link up above if you're interested, but this is a Sapphic love story that takes place during the 1980s space shuttle program, and it's a book that I feel like is really in conversation with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, if you've read that. They're historical novels set decades apart with women in different careers, but I feel like you can kind of read them as being in conversation with each other. I really love this a lot. It made me cry. I think it's fantastic. Definitely would recommend. Next up is Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher is always fantastic, and this is no different. This is her creepy version of Snow White from a different perspective. Definitely creepier, more sort of light horror elements. And instead of being from the perspective of Snow White, it's from the perspective of this woman who is a healer who's also really interested in poisons, who is brought in by Snow White's father to figure out what's wrong with her. It's really interesting. I think it's done really well. It's a very different take on this kind of a story, and it was great. All her books are great, I feel like. Next is Gasians by Mike Curato. This is actually a graphic novel, and I think it is so well done. It is definitely for adults, just a heads up. And it follows a group of queer Asian characters living in Seattle over the course of about a year. And they're all very different. They come from different parts of the Asian diaspora, and they're dealing with different issues. And we see sort of their struggles and their character growth over the course of the year, their relationships with each other, their romantic entanglements, the things that they come up against, the microaggressions they're dealing with. I think this is so good and has so much heart, but it is adult. So just, again, I will say that. But yeah, really, really great graphic novel. Next is Love is a War Song by Danica Nava. This is so good. This is the second romance novel written by this Indigenous author, and I really loved it. This follows an Indigenous pop princess who gets canceled when she does a cover shoot with Rolling Stone wearing a war bonnet, and people start to say, oh, you're a pretendian, you're not really Indigenous, because she's not actually enrolled with the tribe that she was born into, and her mom and her are estranged from her grandmother and that whole side of her family. So she starts getting death threats, and her mom reaches out to the estranged grandmother and ends up sending her to go stay on her ranch until things die down. And while there, she ends up falling for one of the ranch hands. It's one that I think is a really good slow burn romance. It's one that I think has really excellent character development for both of the two leads, and we see her learn and grow and get connected with some of her roots that she never grew up with. Excellent, really good romance. Next is Dark Academia, but make it horror. This is The Library at Hellbore by Cassandra Khaw. I think this is fantastic, but it is certainly not for the faint of heart. There's lots of horror, lots of body horror, and like gruesome deaths in it. This is set at an institute for people who've been born with abilities that could potentially destroy the world. And, you know, one of the problems is when they get to graduation, maybe their teachers want to eat them, and maybe it's kind of hard for them to survive. This is told in a non-linear way that kind of builds tension and mystery in a way that's really interesting. Now I think it would be fun to go back and reread it knowing what I know about the story. I think it would hold up to a rereading. Again, not for the faint of heart or the squeamish, but I thought this was really great. Next is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This was so good. We read this for my Patreon book club. I'm so happy I finally got around to it. Did I buy it because the cover is beautiful? Yes, but I am a sucker for a genre blend that's like a fantasy mystery, and that is exactly what this is. It has a little bit of a Holmes and Watson vibe, but with a really interesting world. There are mysterious deaths in this magical world that are being investigated, and I just thought this was so much fun. I loved it. I liked the characters. I thought the world was cool. I thought the mystery was interesting. It was very entertaining, and yeah, definitely a hit. And it was a hit for most of our book club as well. I loved it. Next up is Sisters in the Wind by Angeline Booley. She just does not miss, y'all. If you have not read her books, they're all so good. They're all kind of upper YA contemporary novels with a little bit of a mystery thriller element to them. And they're books that center Indigenous characters and will probably teach you something along the way, but with really great characters and a fun plot where you don't necessarily feel like you're just being talked at. They're all interconnected. The characters show up in different books. So the main character from her first novel shows up in this book, but it's got a different main character. It's following a girl who grew up mostly in foster care and went through some really horrific things along the way. This has got multiple timelines, so we follow her as a kid and as a teenager going through what she went through, and then we have her as a young adult who is on the run from something, and we don't necessarily know what, but she has the opportunity to possibly reconnect with her birth family. This is a book about ICWA, which is an act that is intended to protect Indigenous children in the foster care system and keep them being placed with Indigenous families so that they don't lose that community and lose that connection to their heritage. And in this case, she is not placed with an Indigenous family for a variety of reasons, and we see what happens as a result. There are some traumatic things in this, but it's just so well written. It's so emotional and has a lot of heart and has wonderful characters. If you haven't tried Angeline Boulley, cannot recommend her enough. This is so good. All right, we've got 3 more before we get to my 6-star favorites of the year. So next is A Mouthful of Dust by Nevo. No one's surprised. Nevo is one of my favorite authors, and I love this series so much. This is part of the Singing Hills cycle, which is a series of East Asian-inspired fantasy novellas that all follow Cleric Chi on their adventures. And each novella has a different genre or type of story that it's telling. I think they're all great. This one has a vengeful ghost and a town that has been through a famine. And I loved it. I thought it was great. I think if you like the Singing Hills cycle, this is not going to disappoint you. And, you know, you could jump in here if you wanted to, or you could start with the other books. They're all fantastic. I think this is book like 6 or 7 in the series, something like that. I love them. Next is Salt Crop by Yume Katasai. This I read recently, and it's so great. It's literary sci-fi. So it is set in a dystopian future, but it's a novel that follows 3 sisters and their complicated relationships with each other and with the world around them. And each part of the book is narrated by a different sister. And I think the character work in this is just incredible. The growth of each sister, the differences in their voices and perspectives, and the way that they view the world and view themselves and view each other is sometimes wildly different. I think it's really fascinating. The story follows the 2 younger sisters who go on a journey to track down their older sister who has gone missing from her job. And the journey takes them places they never necessarily expected. It's quite dangerous along the way. And so we get this dystopian future Earth and all of this world building surrounding that, these sci-fi elements in that. But the center of the story, the beating heart of the story, is this sibling relationship, and it's great. I loved it. If you like literary sci-fi, definitely would recommend. Oh, this is interesting. As I'm looking at this, I think it's worth noting that The Tainted Cup is the only book on this list that I just read on my own and didn't have for review. But I guess that says I do a pretty good job of picking books for review, yeah? The final best book of the quarter before we get into my 6-star faves is A Merry Little Lie by Sarah Morgan. I love Sarah Morgan. I love her holiday books. I don't normally read a lot of women's fiction, but for whatever reason, the way Sarah Morgan writes just hits the right way for me. And I read a book of hers almost every year. So this was great. I really liked it. If that sounds like your thing, maybe check it out. This is set around the holidays, and it follows a family with siblings coming home for the holidays. And it's a lot of family drama, relationship drama. There is a romance that happens, but I wouldn't call this genre romance. I would call this more women's fiction, because the central focus is really the family and their relationships with each other. We've got the brother coming home with a new girlfriend and a surprise announcement. We've got a sister coming to Christmas for the first time with her husband, but their marriage is going through some struggles. And then we have the other sister who secretly had been in love with her sister's husband and is hiding that, but then maybe she's gonna reconnect with a childhood best friend and maybe they have feelings for each other. So there's that. It's super messy. And then we've got the parents. The mom is spiraling about everybody coming home for the holidays, and the dad is recently retired and is really struggling with that. So it's an amalgamation of all of these different issues that all the members of the family are dealing with. I just love the way that she writes. I love the way she writes characters and relationships, and often the way that she depicts different stages in life and different issues that people face really resonates with me. So if you're looking for a holiday novel with a lot of heart and family drama, this might be it. All right, lastly, let's talk about the 4 books that got 6 stars for me this quarter. These are books that I consider favorites of the year. The first one should come as no big surprise because this is one of my favorite authors. I always love her books. They're not always on my favorites of the year list, but I always love them, and this is one of my favorites of hers. This is The Bewitching by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. It's a witchy horror novel that is multi-generational, light horror, more paranormal, but it definitely has like witchy horror elements to it. And we're following 3 characters across 3 different timelines. I think the most recent one is like the 90s, the early 2000s, maybe the early 2000s, something like that. So none of it is contemporary, but then we have somebody living in the early 1900s and someone in like the 50s, and their lives and experiences are all interconnected, and it deals with dark magic. The more modern perspective is a Mexican graduate student who is dealing with being an international student in the United States and what that is like and some of the microaggressions that she faces as a Latin American woman in academia. We have one perspective set in Mexico that is dealing with incestuous grooming, and that is rough to read, so content warning for that. But I think that, as usual, the author handles it really well. There's a lot in here about power and power dynamics and how that impacts people in different ways and the harm that comes with it. I really loved it. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't read it. I love Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. Next is A Forbidden Alchemy by Stacey McEwen. This is the book that I would recommend to people who are fantasy readers, primarily, who want to read a romantasy that they will like. Something that has more world building, more plot, a book that could stand on its own if you pulled the romance out of it, but still does have a central romance. This is great. It has a really interesting world and magic system. The central story is about a political rebellion, a class rebellion, and two characters kind of caught in the middle of it. And in this world, magic is quite literally a resource that is mined from the ground and consumed and kept by the wealthy upper classes for themselves. And I think this is fantastic. At the beginning of the story, we follow a boy and a girl who, because they're 12 years old, go to the ceremony where supposedly every 12-year-old is tested to see if they can use magic. But what they're not being told, again, by the ruling classes, is that it's all fake. And if those 12-year-olds are from the lower classes, they're not given the real thing that could let them use magic. The two of them find out the truth, and they each handle it differently. The girl uses it to get herself into an elite academy, and the boy goes home and takes it with him and ends up being a part of the beginning of a political rebellion. And then they meet years later as adults. It's great. I really like this a lot. It does end on a cliffhanger. I'm excited for book 2. Again, if you are a fantasy reader first and you want a romantasy that has more of those like real fantasy elements, I think this is a great one. Next is Tusk Love by Thea Guanzon. I loved this so much. This made me so happy. It's a really fun fantasy romance that is set in a Dungeons and Dragons type world and apparently is in the world of Critical Role. I have heard from some commenters on a previous video that there are a lot of really fun Easter eggs for fans of Critical Role. I am not familiar with any of them, and I loved it. So you do not have to be into Critical Role to enjoy this as a fantasy romance. It's between a merchant's daughter who is attacked on the road and the half-orc who saves her and decides to travel with her to her arranged marriage. But along the way, things heat up between the two of them. I loved this. It was fun. It was sexy. It was hilarious. I thought it was absolutely delightful. One of my favorite romances I've read this year. And finally, I do not have a physical copy yet, but I should be getting one from the publisher because I was like, hey, I really love this. Can you please send me a copy? So I think they are sending me a copy. This is Girl Dinner by Olive E. Blake. I really like Olive E. Blake's writing. This is one of my favorite books from her. This is a blend of horror and social satire. It is set at a university, and it's really about womanhood, the expectations of womanhood. What does that mean? What does that look like in different phases of life? We follow two perspective characters. One of them is a sophomore who is trying to get into an elite sorority that has some secrets. And the other one is a woman who is a faculty member. She's adjunct faculty. She's a new mom, and her husband is tenure track. And she is going back to work for the first time since having her daughter, struggling with leaving her daughter in daycare, struggling with the misogyny she faces in her department, and feeling the need to prove herself that she's worth the money they invested to have her there. And then she makes some friends who end up asking her to be the academic advisor for this sorority. And things go from there. I really like this a lot. It's fun, but it's also, I think, really smart and insightful, and I resonated with a lot of it. I thought this was fantastic. I loved it. So there you go. Those are my top 20 books that I read in quarter 3. It's been a great quarter, some really fantastic books this year, and hopefully this is helpful for your TBR so that you can find some new books that maybe fit the genres that you're interested in. If you reach this point in the video, leave me a heart eyes emoji because we love these books. These books are so good. Or for your question of the day, let me know if you've read any of these or if you want to read any of these, if you've had different experiences, if some of them piqued your interest. Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.